Hello everyone and welcome to the Viking channel. My name is Lena Elisabeth Norman. I was born and raised in Stockholm, Sweden. I received my BA and MA from Uppsala University. My major was history and my minor was Nordic languages. And from there I went on to the US to pursue a PhD at Harvard University in older Germanic languages and literatures. So the Viking Age has been the focus for my research for many years. And in this series I will teach you the basics about the Scandinavian Viking Age and its people. So, to start with, what is the Viking Age and when is it? The first recordings we have of any Viking activities is from June 8, 793. In the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles we can read about the attack on the monastery in Lindisfarne. And the last recordings is from the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25, 1066, when the Norwegian king Harald Sigurdsson together with Earl Tostig is conquered by the English king Harold Godwinson. Of course there were activities in this world both before the attack on Lindisfarne and after the battle at Stamford Bridge, but these are the official recordings we have, which means we have an uncertain beginning and an uncertain end, but that gives us a scoop, at least, of the time period we are dealing with. So what does the term Viking mean? It comes from Old Norse, and Viking can have different meanings. It could come from vik, which means bay, so there are lots of bays in both on the Scandinavian and Norwegian mainland. It could also be a description of the activities. So what you go when you go in Viking, you go out to raid, you go out to trade, you go out to explore, and you go out to settle. So you could actually claim that it's a job description. So mostly young men in groups would get together over the summer, equip a ship, sail east or sail west to raid, trade, explore, and try to find places to settle. So where on the map are we when we talk about the Viking Age activities? Scandinavia proper consists of Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and in this wider scope we have to include the Baltic countries as well. The Swedish Vikings, they went east. They went to the Baltic countries, they went into Russia, they would interact with the Russian people, also with the Baltic people, they would settle, and the settlements eventually would be mixed. They would reach all the way into the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. The Norwegian and the Danish Vikings, they would go west on their journeys. They would settle England, Ireland, the Shetland, Faroes, Iceland, Greenland, all the way to the North American continent, and also go down along the European Atlantic coast into the Mediterranean. And who were these people living in Scandinavia during the Viking Age? Most of the people were regular farmers or craftsmen. There were men, women, children, of course, and the ones who were called the Vikings, they are the ones who left to go out on these expeditions for the purposes of raiding, trading, exploring, and settling. So calling the people on the mainland for Vikings, it's not the proper way to do it, because it is the job description. It is the young men who live. At home, in Scandinavia, there were no cities. There were villages, there were farms, there were little groups of farms, there were trading places, but there was a social hierarchy. At the very top you would have the chieftains and the petty kings, you would have in the middle the free farmers, and at the very bottom you would have the slaves. So you had the stratification of power, but there was not one king until later. When you talk about the hierarchical structure with chieftain or petty kings at the top, the free farmers and the slaves, you mostly think about men. But women, where do they belong in this structure? We know, of course, that women were slaves, the free farmers, they had wives, and of course now we know that even women could have more powerful positions. They could go out in Viking But they had the power in a way we didn't know until now with recently excavated archaeological findings. How do we know anything about what happened in Scandinavia during this time period so long ago? We don't have any writings from inside Scandinavia, but we have outside sources. We can read the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, for example. There are Anglo-Saxon poems, and we have different historians. We have, for example, the Arabic historian Ibn Fadlan, who traveled into Russia along Volga, where he met a group of Rus, and he witnessed a burial of a chieftain and a human sacrifice. He was horrified by what he saw, and he wrote that down. These are examples of outside sources. Within Scandinavia, there are no written sources. Of course, the people in the Viking Age Scandinavia knew how to write. They had a runic alphabet based on the Latin alphabet, so they could write, they could put words together. But the runes were not written on a pergament. They were carved into stone. We have the big rune stones with usually commemoration. Or they could be carved into wood or onto bones also for usually shorter messages. We also have storytelling. In this culture in Scandinavia, storytelling is extremely important. It's oral storytelling. And we have the poems. And all the stories and all the poems, they follow a strict formula because they had to be memorized since they couldn't be written down. Of course, today we can find them in written forms. We can look at these stories and we can read them today. And one of the most important collection of poems you can find in the Poetic, Edda. This is a compilation of poems now with an editor who put the poems in the order as they are presented in this book. If the poems were recited in this order, we do not know. But in this compilation of poems, we get an insight into the mindset of the people in the Viking Age in Scandinavia. The first poem in this compilation is the prophecy of the seeress. She talks in the I form like she's present. She's present and she tells us, the audience, about the creation of the world. She tells about the gods. She tells about their adventure, about the daily lives, what they're doing, in the anticipation of Ragnarök, which is the end of the world. The second poem is called The Saying of the Highest One. It is a very didactic poem. Each verse tells about how to behave, how to conduct oneself in this time period, both in regard to social interaction, but also to drinking and eating, how to take care of oneself, what you need to think about when you go into a new or unknown territory. So it tells you what to do. For example, you go into a home of someone you don't know, you stop in the doorway and you have to look to your right and then you need to look to the left. You can't just go in because you don't know what is waiting. So these are kind of the advice you are given. With time, the composers of poems started to forget how to create these very elaborate poems, both the Eddic poems, the anonymous, the more practical poems, the storytelling, or the skaldic poems, which is a very, very elaborate praise poem, usually praising of a king or a chieftain. Snorri Sturluson, one of the most powerful chieftains in Iceland, born 1179 and he died 1241, he realized that people had started to forget how to make this, how to compose these elaborate poems. In his estate, Oddi, he collected people to come and sit there, collect stories, but also he wanted to write down like a handbook in how to compose this poetry. In prose form, therefore it's called the Prose Edda, he took the poems, the stories about the heroes, the stories about the gods, and he made that into prose form. He took the knowledge of the meters, the alliteration, and he made part of his Prose Edda as a handbook how to create this poem. Just so that people within his lifetime, in his surrounding, would not forget these stories about the heroes, the stories about the past, the stories about the creation of the world, the stories about the end of the world, the stories about how to behave oneself, how to conduct oneself in a successful way. He put that together in the prose form. And when I talk about the stories and when I talk about the poems, I have a mix of both of them. Usually they are the same stories, but sometimes the plot differ a bit. Sometimes the endings of a poem differ a bit, but in general it's exactly the same stories with the same characters. The oldest manuscripts for both the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda are from early 13th century, so hundreds of years after the events in these stories take place. So, in order to go deeper into the understanding of the people during the Viking Age in Scandinavia, their beliefs, their actions, we need to talk about the creation of the world in the mythological sense, and also then continue to understand the end of the world, their beliefs and so forth. And we will start with that in the next episode.